Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 119th chapter in the book of Psalms. We're going to open this one up the same way we've opened up every other from this chapter, with an explanation of acrostic. An acrostic is a poetic device whereby the opening letter of the first word of every verse corresponds to the same letter, and these are arranged in stanzas of 8 verses. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. They have no vowels, it's all consonants, but that gets us to the sum equation of 176. This is by far the longest chapter in either testament, and we recently made it past the halfway point. The range we most recently covered was verses 81 through 96. And so 88's the midway point. And these correspond with the Hebrew letters Kaf and Lamed, respectively. Kaf is verses 81 through 88, and then 89 through 96 is Lamed. So we're just going to review what we already covered in greater detail in the previous lesson, some of the verses. Verse 81, "For your salvation my soul has pined away, for I have waited for your word." One of the most fantastic elements of the word are the promises contained therein. And of course, the greatest promise of all is the greatest miracle, the salvation of a sinner. We too must pine away. We have to long for it. We have to labor for it. And there's an element of effort and endurance entailed in the word pine, and the element of patience. We have to wait on his word. A lot of the promises do require and demand patience, so the best things in life are worth waiting for, and there is nothing greater than the salvation of a sinner. Verse 82, "My eyes have pined away for your word, saying, when would it comfort me?" There's that phrase again, pined away. So his eyes are busy, and he has his eyes on his nose in the Bible and his eyes on the words. The word is it's more extensive than Scripture alone, but we want to focus on the word that he's talking about. This is the Torah and the laws and the writings. But he has a source of comfort and relief even in travails. The psalmist was no stranger to persecution. He had to pay the price publicly for his fastidious adherence to the law. And so he comments on that vein in verse 85. "The proud have dug pits for me, which is not according to your Torah." So the proud are his enemies, and he is of the Torah, they are not. That is the difference. And one who is grounded in studying the Torah will not be proud. The Pharisees certainly became proud, but they were looking at the law the wrong way. They weren't even looking at the law. They added to the law, and they became proud by observing more than was required, and that stimulated the sin of self-righteousness. And by the time the Son of Man came along, they were so wrapped up in this image and this persona and their pride that they couldn't even see the Son of God when he was in their midst. But the psalm, throughout the book of Psalms, we read of the karmic boomerang, according to which the wicked who lay traps and snares for others eventually and inevitably will be caught in the own snares and traps and deceits and deceptions that they intend for other. Verse 87, "They almost made an end of me on earth, but I did not forsake your orders." He lived by the law, and he was willing to die for it. He was at death's door. His enemies meant business. They were busy, and they were hostile, and they were mean. But in all hazard and health, he did not abandon the orders. Orders is one of the 8 terms, which are not exactly synonymous, but they are used throughout every stanza. No stanza contains less than 6 of these. These are laws, plural, statutes, precepts, commandments, ordinances, decrees, and word. So that's according to one translation. Lamed is verses 89 through 96. We're going to begin with the 90th verse. "Your trustworthiness is to all generations. You establish the earth, and it stands. He is an eternal being, and all his attributes are as eternal as himself. He was trustworthy from the beginning. He is incapable of not being trustworthy. faithfulness is a whole nother degree and scale when it's used in reference to the one we have faith towards, but our faith is limited and weak. We all sin, and that is a breach of faithlessness, but his trustworthiness is so the same entity or force or being who established the earth and laid the foundations thereof, and by his power the earth still stands. It's still spinning in motion at the same rate it was, and that is connected to the same eternal being whose trustworthiness is to all generations. There's no limitation. From Adam to the present day, he's never been not involved in the fate of humanity. Verse 93, let me never forget your orders, for by them you have given me life. So if you forget the orders, you lose your life by the extreme interpretation of this equation. But it is easy to forget the orders and the commandments, and the way to do that is to fall out of the practice of observing them. You can study them, but we are not made. A man becomes just by doing just actions. Aristotle said that, and this was in contrast to the Platonic Socratic ethics, according to which virtue was knowledge. But if we fall out of the practice, we have to not only learn them but live them. And if we are not walking the walk and merely talking the talk, then we're going to forget the orders, and it's going to be meaningless. And these orders give life, they give meaning to life, they add vitality to life, and by them we live, and by them we die. The psalmist certainly did. The wicked have waited for me to destroy me. I understand your witnesses. Verse 95, so the wicked, the psalmist was no stranger to conflict. He had enemies, he had antagonists, he had people that meant business. They tried to kill him, I guess, and they're trying to destroy him, but he takes solace and comfort and relief in his knowledge and understanding of his witnesses. The witnesses, our faith is built on the witnesses of others. We did not see the resurrection, but we trust the apostles' report because these men were honest, reliable, and true. No one willingly dies for what they believe was a lie, and all of them paid the price with the exception of John for their witness of the resurrection. I have seen an end of all perfection. Your command is exceedingly broad. Again, there's a graded scale between divine perfection and human perfection. He is perfect. He is intrinsically perfect. He is perfect in all that he is, all that he does. He is perfect in every facet of his component. Perfection is unattainable because we are imperfect by our very natures. We are imperfect, hence perfection lays beyond us. But if we look at him and we see his perfection, and the Torah, the law, is a manifestation of his perfection, it is perfect. We are not. The problem with obeying the law is not the law itself, but us. We get in the way. But it is, we have the standard of perfection in the law. Now we're going to do the lesson itself, verse 97. This is the letter Mem in the Hebrew alphabet. Oh, how I love your Torah. It is my study all day long. This is a love ballad of the psalmist expressing his love, adoration, and affection for the law, start to finish. He's just completely in love with it. He was related to it. He spent time with it. He was his companion and a source of love. And studying, he has the attitude not only of a servant, but a student. He is a teacher of the law. He is clearly a priest. He is an expert authority. We are learning from him. He is teaching posterity as well as his own generation, but he was always a student all day, every day, throughout the day. That's what all day long means. So, you don't have to have your nose in the Bible every waking second of every day, but you want to have it on your mind and in your heart and be walking the walk when you are out there. So we study in order to live it. Your commandments make me wiser than my enemies, for it is ever before me. So even though he had enemies who were hostile, he was smarter than them. So the way to overcome enemies is if you are smarter than your enemies, look at Donald Trump now. He's completely owning all his enemies in every way, shape, and form, start to finish. They're fighting, but they're losing because he's smarter than them all, much as the psalmist was. He was wiser than his enemies. His enemies may have had intelligence, they may have had craft, they may have had subtlety, deceit, but wisdom is an altogether higher plane of intelligence. Wisdom gives the perspective to the understanding and the meaning. It enriches and enhances, and it is ever before me. That means he has it in front of his face. He's living it out, and he's doing it, wherever he is, wherever he goes. I have more understanding than all my teachers, for your witnesses are my study. So he had human teachers, but he exceeded them all. The student became the master, not automatically, but eventually, the longer he stayed in this word, he eventually surpassed his teachers. Now, that is not to diminish those who come before us to appropriate the humility of Sir Isaac Newton. He claimed to be able to see farther because he stood on the shoulder of giants. So their contribution, the reason that we advance as a civilization is because one generation passes on their discoveries and foundations. You're not going to have cell phones and satellites from a Paleolithic society. That is the accumulation of things. But, the understanding that he's talking about is not technological, but theological. And his witnesses are his study. That's what he does. That's what he learns. That's what he lives. That's what he teaches. They are his study, as it ought to be ours. I understand more than the aged, for I have observed your orders. Elderliness is not. It is an overly simplistic measuring rod, which suggests that the older people are automatically more wiser than the young. Certainly an older person will be wiser than they were 20 years ago, just from the accumulation of life experience. Even if they were foolish, wicked, and wayward, they're going to get the lesson eventually and hopefully die regretting it. But, wisdom is a gift, and it is not unattainable to we who are young. And the passage of the New Testament, which springs immediately to mind, is Paul writing to Timothy, let no one despise you because of your youth. So we should have respect and reverence for our elder, but if we are smarter than them, that this is a truth. This is not a statement of braggadocio. This is a statement of truth. He's speaking truth. He was, wiser than all the aged, and the reason he surpassed his teacher is because he had two teachers, human and divine. And in 1 John 2:20 through 27, he says, what need have we of a human teacher when we have the Ruach Kadesh? I have restrained my feet from every evil way, that I might guard your word. So you have to restrain yourself from evil. Evil is a magnet. It is alluring. It is attracting, and it catches suckers by its snares and its allures and temptations and deceits. So the way we do that is to guard the word, and the word will keep us away. The Bible will. I forget the quote, but at all times and in all ways we have to keep the word. Whether evil is around us, that is no excuse to succumb it, because we have the reliable. If we are in the practice of consciously remembering the word, then the temptation for evil will still be there, but it's not as much, and it's all manageable and under control. We want to control evil and not be controlled by it, because evil has devastating, degrading, destructive consequences. I have not turned aside from your judgments, for you yourself have taught me. The you is capitalized. This is to Yahweh, Elohim, and so he had the divine teacher. He was he had human teachers, but he was ultimately, his main learning was through the law, and more specifically the communion that he had with the author, and he was inspired by the Ruach Kadesh. So when he was, and the same Ruach Kadesh who inspired all the writers of sacred writ also illuminates the reader thereof. This psalmist would have been familiar start to finish, everywhere in between with the laws of Moses. He had the abiding spirit to inspire him and to illuminate him. And the best teacher at all, there's no comparison. Every human is inadequate in comparison to the author of the law. That is not to suggest that we categorically exclude human input, because the Father does often speak through people he places in our paths, and their insights can be amalgamated into our own framework. How sweet to my taste has your word been, more than honey to my mouth. So he had an appetite for the word. He feasted on it. He consumed it. He just, it was his basic pursuit, and he considered it as a more pleasant taste than honey. Honey is a sweet delicacy, but he compared the experience of reading to the experience of eating, and this was every bit as pleasant and delightful and as tantalizing as honey is to the tongue, so too was the word on his mouth and in his mind. From your orders I get understanding, therefore I have hated every false ways. So if we lack understanding, all we need to do is retreat and turn and ground ourselves in the Bible and from his orders. These are his commandments. These are his directives. They will give us understanding. They will make us wiser, because if you are not wiser, then you are, morality is symptomatic of wisdom. Not that wisdom is a sickness or anything, but... and we will have the understanding, which enables us to have the healthy discrimination between true and false. And I think it's unfortunate that our postmodern mindsets has conditioned many of us to think of discrimination in exclusively negative terms. Racial discrimination is wrong, but there's also the discrimination between right and wrong that is the quality and the attribute and the characteristic of discernment, which is absolutely necessary and vital for the Christian to have. It is one of the ingredients in wisdom, which is the sum equation of knowledge, understanding, discretion, prudence, et al., etc. All those in one. This is the second half of the lesson itself. This is the Hebrew letter Nun. So this is verses 105 to 112. And the 105th chapter is the most familiar and often repeated. The 105th verse is the most famous of this psalm. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. The psalmist combines two familiar images, that being a lamp and that being a light. So lights in the ancient world, they did not have flashlights. They had little lamps of oil, which could only light so far, and you could not see, the end of the road when you were carrying a lamp on an ancient road in darkness when it was unsmooth. But the word is the source of light. That gives us perspective, that gives us depth, that gives us knowledge and understanding and insight, and the path of the Jew, as much as the Christian, was a path unto life eternal. And the word will guide us there. It will lead us home. These are basic instructions before leaving earth. This is a word, is a lamp. It's a source of light and illumination and enlightenment, and it will enable us to navigate through the difficulties and challenges of life and make it through. Basic instructions before leaving earth. When we leave earth, we want to land up there. I have sworn and I confirm to keep your righteous judgments. Now, a vow is not something to take lightly, and we always must remember that we are not saved by our promises to him. We are saved by his promises to us. But, if you take a vow, you better make sure that you're not going to violate it. That is a serious thing. One you should not enter into lightly and with the extremest and utmost conscience. But this psalmist was confident in his ability to keep the righteous judgments. The judgments were righteous because they emanated from him. He is completely and intrinsically righteous, and in him no element. And there is always a dichotomy and contrast between earthly justice and divine judgment. His justice is perfect. Our justice is imperfect. the justice system is an oxymoron in most countries of human history. It's just the way it is. I have been afflicted very much, O Yahweh. Revive me according to your word. Revive me according to your word. This psalmist was independently incompetent to revive himself, to rejuvenate himself, and this was the cause and effect consequence of being affliction. When you are affliction is just any pain or unpleasantness. So we don't know if it was sickness, if it was persecution, if it was poverty. It could have been one or many of the above, or maybe even all of them. And those aren't the only sources of affliction, but affliction is good because the path of affliction and that path alone leads to the land where affliction is unknown. I think Charles Spurgeon, the 19th century Baptist preacher, said that, but it might have been sorrow. But in any case, it is not. We should not. We have to embrace our afflictions and to have perspective and in depth. And our pains will not make us bitter, but make us better. And we can have the restoration of life. We will have the energy according to His word and not our own. Once more, we are not saved by what we promise Him, but what He promises us. And the most fantastic element of the word is the promises contained therein. Please accept the voluntary offering of my mouth, in Yahweh, and teach me your judgments. So he's not talking about an animal sacrifice here. He's talking about a voluntary offering of his mouth. This is the humble sacrifice of praise that is to be on the tips of the tongue. And animal sacrifices are not the only form of sacrifice. We are called to be living sacrifices in Romans 12:1. So, but even in the Old Testament, where animal sacrifices was the norm, there were the offerings of praise. That concept is not unique. And the psalmist, he knows a lot about his judgments, but he wants to know more. We can never exhaust the fullness of the infinitude of his judgments in one lifetime alone. That's simply beyond ourselves. We are never so knowledgeable as to not need more knowledge. We got to keep it going. My life is in my hand continually, and in your Torah I have not forgotten. So this psalmist was struggling for life, in his confrontations with his enemies, the men of the world, the proud, the one who laid snares, the ones who lied about him, the ones who spread rumors about him and whispering campaigns and character assassinations. They were out to get him. But in all hazards and health, he remembered his Torah, and that's what gave him the strength to endure and the wisdom to triumph over his enemies. So the Torah is a source of wisdom and strength, much as every element, not just the laws of Moses, but also the writings, the prophets, the Gospels, the book of Acts, New Testament history, the epistles, and Revelation. All these are sources of strength and wisdom, start to finish. The wicked have laid a snare for me, but I have not strayed from your orders. There they are again. These are his enemies. They're trying to trap him. They're trying to destroy him. They're trying to kill him. They're trying to injure him. They're trying to make him give up the race and ultimately try to defeat him. They are in a contest of which there is, only one person can emerge triumphant in it. But he did not succumb to the snares because he did not stray from his orders. His orders, his directives, his commandments, his will keep us away from the snares of the enemy, the spiritual enemy, and our human enemies, Satan. Yahweh works through people, so too does Satan. Your witnesses are my inheritance forever, for they are the joy of my heart. His witness, not only his witness, but that of the prophets and the apostles, are our inheritance forever. The Bible has withstood these centuries. It is, efforts have been made to stamp it out, to kill it, and it's still banned in 52 countries at the filming of this. But they are our inheritance, and that will never leave us. It will connect with us. If we connect to it in this life, it will connect to us forever after, and it will be here for our progeny, and we can witness to them based on the testimony and the witness of the men who came before us, the men who started the race that we've been running for over 2,000 years. And they are a source of pleasure and delight and satisfaction and joy. Joy is altogether distinct from happiness. Happiness is a fleeting emotion. Joy is not dependent on circumstances. It rejoices even in pains and tribulations and in trials and persecutions and pains et al., etc. 112th and final verse. I have inclined my heart to your laws forever to the end. He's in it for the long run. The Christian and the Jewish life, remember he's not Christian, is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a 365-day-a-year, 24/7 gig. So we have to have the element of endurance in order to connect us to the eternal. And we have to incline our hearts. That means we have to desire it. We have to gravitate towards it. We have to be moved and animated and motivated by the laws, and we got to keep doing it and not stop, not get our daily fix. It's not a one and done fix. We have to continually sustain on it forever to the end if we want to make it to forever and make it to the end of life with the beginning of eternal life. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.